Organ donation is when a partial or whole organ or tissue is removed from one human body and transplanted to another to replace a damaged or failing organ. Common transplantations include the heart, intestines, kidneys, lungs, liver, pancreas, and skin. Donations from brain-dead donors or those whose hearts have stopped beating greatly outweigh those donated by living donors. Living donors can donate part of the liver, pancreas, or one of their kidneys. Unfortunately, those in need of an organ greatly outnumber the amount of organs available for transplant, resulting in long waiting lists. As of November 11, 2008, over 100,000 people are on waiting list for an organ transplant, and only 9,491 organs have been transplanted in the year 2008 alone.
People may not be aware of just the variety of organ donations that go on, and as well tissue donation, I would say, because as you look at an organ, it's something that functions and, kind of moves and what have you, but an organ is made up of tissues, and both of these are really important for transplants. Organs can be, there's heart transplants, there's kidney transplants, we probably know a lot about those, liver transplants, but there's also tissue transplants that are important in medicine, things like corneas, things like skin, another kind of transplant.
Some people may not be aware of the fact that, first of all, that you must be dead. This became a problem when people were attempting to give organs from anencephalic infants, and the court in Florida, particularly the Supreme Court in Florida, ruled the dead donor rule insists that you must be dead. And we have two definitions of death, either irreversible cessation of heart and respiration or brain death. And lots of people are confused about brain death. They don't know what it is, and they're confused about it. And it means the loss of all electrical activity in the entire brain, including the lower brain stem. So you find people wanting to give away or donate organs, particularly of relatives who are in a persistent vegetative state, who are not dead. So the definition of death and the dead donor rule causes some confusion.
There's a difference between cadaver and live organ donation. I received 2 cadaver lungs. So unfortunately for me, someone had to pass away for me to receive an organ. It wasn't until more in the 90s that more people were able to donate parts of their lobe of their liver or their lobes of their lungs. Kidneys people have been doing live donor transplants for a long time, but as the whole system has improved and innovation has improved with medicine, more people can donate live. Living donors can donate.
There's a lot of matching that needs to be done for donations, and that's why there's these waiting lists for tissue donation and for organ donation, because you have to match the antigens that are on an organ between the donor and the recipient. And the antigen is just a protein on the surface of the organ or the tissue. And you have to make sure that whoever's going to receive it isn't going to make antibodies against it and reject it because of it. So that's why you hear about these long waits that people do.
Most major religions, including Catholicism, support transplantation for beneficial purposes.
Most religions have no problem with organ donation, and this includes Catholicism, Christianity, Islam, most of Judaism. So for the most part, none of the major religions in the world have a problem with organ donation, because the organs are taken from someone who is, with an organ donation, you're actually technically somewhat alive, but you're brain dead. With tissue donations, that can be taken from someone who is dead. So it becomes really a personal decision whether people want to do it or not.
Whole cultures opposed to organ donation. Orthodox Jewish community, for example, does not believe that organs should be donated. The entire country of Japan, until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, adamantly opposed any organ retrieval. So you have cultures that believe that the entire body must be buried intact, and so object to autopsies, object to organ donation, and that's their belief, and that's the way they proceed. It's a cultural phenomenon. I mean, there's no persuading somebody who believes on religious reasons that the whole body should be buried. There's no way you're going to tell them or convince them or persuade them that that's incorrect.
To me, the real surprising one is face. There have been now some face transplants, and when you think about how personal a face is to an individual and how important it really is to an identity. These have been done in Europe. It hasn't been done in this country. I don't think there's any kind of approved protocol, but there have been a few face transplants. Now, to me, that is almost like transferring an identity to another person. Skin is interesting because skin doesn't have to be taken from another person, and in fact, skin transplants are done all the time. And it's actually been done routinely for a few decades now, where you can take, if one of us was injured in some way, we could take some of our living skin and we could culture that outside of the body and then put it back into ourselves, and it would grow very well. That's all been figured out for skin. Skin is further along than most other tissues, and there won't be any rejection problems because skin is actually coming from you yourself.
Now, the source of the organs becomes the problem. In the earliest days, they were simply patients who arrived dead on arrival at the emergency room. There were very few. And it wasn't until 1968 that we had the so-called ad hoc criteria for brain death defined at Harvard. And that then became the basis for almost all organ retrieval, namely patients who had suffered brain death. However, with the successful transplant, the demand for organs increased exponentially. We now have thousands of people on waiting lists for organs, and the number of organ donors is strictly limited. So then came the interesting issue, how do we increase the number of donors? There were proposals in legislation that we would have what some European countries have, namely so-called presumed consent. You would presume that the individual who dies would have wanted to give the organs unless they specifically wrote prior to their demise that they did not. That did not work in the United States at all. It goes against the whole American ethos of autonomy and self-determination. Another proposal that caused a flurry of criticism was the so-called non-heart-beating cadaver organ donors. That is, lots of people who were in hospitals who were dying, particularly of neurological disease, but who were not brain dead. The decision was made by the family to remove life support, particularly ventilators, and these patients will expire in a very short time. So, particularly at the University of Wisconsin Medical School, they had this idea. We would take the patients down to the operating room, remove the ventilator at the request of the family, pronounce the patient dead, then restart the heart on, quote, the dead patient to keep the organs well perfused, and then harvest the organs in a timely fashion. Well, this certainly did not meet the dead donor rule of death by irreversible cessation of heart and respiration. These hearts were restarted. And people like Renee Fox said, this is cannibalism. We can't do this. These people aren't dead. There's not any sense that they've met this. Then came the proposal that, well, we're removing the ventilator because the ventilator is not appropriate for this patient and the family is never going to agree to put it back on. So we'll bring the patient down to the operating room, remove the ventilator, wait 2 to 5 minutes, it varies depending on which standard you're using, pronounce them dead at that time, and then immediately remove the organs. And the argument is that these patients are in fact dead because of the will of the surrogate not to attempt resuscitation. Namely, they're not going to be resuscitated, and they do not auto-resuscitate after the longest period was a minute. Now, that has caused enormous controversy. In a recent article in the August New England Journal of Medicine, when at Denver Children's Hospital, to get more organs, particularly organs from newborns, they would take seriously ill newborns, remove the ventilator, wait 75 seconds and pronounce them dead, and then harvest the organs. Now, the problem with this is that we know auto-resuscitation in infants, not in adults, but in infants, can occur 5 or 10 minutes after the cessation of heart. We've had cases where it's happened. So it's rather not very honest to say that they are dead after 75 seconds because there's irreversible cessation of heart and respiration, when in fact we have known reported cases of auto-resuscitation, self-resuscitation, up to 5 or 10 minutes after the demise of the heart. Remember, in all these cases that the families have agreed, and the grieving families want to have some good come out of the death of their infant child, and they've agreed to it. But the issue in the literature is this in fact violating the dead donor rule? And the critiques in the same issue, the August 14th issue of the New England Journal this year, there were articles saying that this is a violation and ought not be allowed to continue.